So no question that was one, and I will disagree with Vinnie Carthan, and there's no other way to say that than that is a tax increase. I mean, first of all, we're taking the sales tax and making it permanent, so that we're taking the decision away from the county electorates. And second of all, there's a new use tax in there that's never been there before. So, it is what it is, and it is a tax increase. Whether it was meritorious or not is up to each one of the 100 members how they voted. Obviously, especially being from Lynn County, I was not supportive of that. I don't think Lynn County ever would have passed it had they believed they were acquiescing to a statewide increase. So, and I also will say, just because I feel compelled to respond to it, I don't know where we came up with this. The largest donor of the Republican Party is Big Tobacco. And quite frankly, 2 months ago, I couldn't even tell you who lobbied for Big Tobacco, and I had to go find them to ask them a question on a statewide smoking ban. So, I mean, that's ludicrous.
Senator Grunzel.
Any surprise other than what we just discussed?
I think the surprise was, even though it's an election year, we didn't hesitate to take on tough issues. We didn't hesitate to do the kinds of things that will make our state a better place. We took a look at things like the smoking ban. It'd be easy to say, hey, let's put that off. This is an election year. Let's put that off. Let's put infrastructure for schools. Oh, the Republicans will call it a tax increase, and they might use it against us. Let's put that off. I know a bridge fell in Minnesota, and we're a little worried about our transportation infrastructure, but let's put that off because some might call that another tax increase. I think the surprise for me is that a whole bunch of people of good faith came to the legislature, worked together. There were 17 Republicans for the silo bill in the House. 17 Republicans. That was a pretty good show, and it was an effort to face the issues and kind of some what I call political underbrush. The statewide silo issue has been around since we passed the local option issue, and the reason it's been around is because of this inequity. Some districts have very high sales tax revenue per pupil. Other districts have very low sales tax revenue per pupil. And so people took a look at that issue, but other folks said, wait a minute, there's an inequity on the property tax side as well. So this bill, not a tax increase, dead wrong, not a tax increase. This was a tax shift. It took the 1 cent use tax, that's about $32 million a year, and dedicated it directly to property tax reduction. Now that's not a tax increase. You may not like the fact that we're migrating away from property taxes to sales tax, and people can make decent arguments about that, but that's not a tax increase. That's a property tax cut, and it's a shift, but not a tax increase.
Talk about silo or surprise?
Surprises.
Surprises, I guess. I'll bring up the illegal immigration issue again. I know I participate in many legislative forums before we go into the legislature. And both Republicans and Democrats were talking about the illegal immigration issue. So at the opening of the session, Minority Leader Wick asked me to be part of a task force to put some ideas out there in regard to the illegal immigration issue, things that we could implement on the statewide level. We looked at what some other states have been successful in implementing. We did put a comprehensive plan out there. The fact that nothing came up at all in regard to the issue was a huge surprise and a disappointment to me.
I had a couple of surprises this year. One is it was on the area of illegal immigration. I was surprised at how the different entities out there kind of broke down in terms of their support and opposition for the legislation. It really exposed kind of the reasons behind the issue of illegal immigration. What you really have is kind of the reverse of what occurred with NAFTA. You have corporate CEOs using the fact that the federal government does not enforce the law to recruit cheap labor up here and to keep them below the radar screen where you're not playing into workers' comp and things of that nature. And then they work with allies of theirs in the Republican Party for political purposes to say, blame the Democrats for illegal immigration because we don't do enough to go after the worker that's being abused. So let's go after them for that, but let's don't disturb our flow of cheap labor. And so you have places there, groups like the Association of Business and Industry vehemently opposed to any enforcement of our immigration laws. The Republican plan in the Senate I refer to as an amnesty plan for corporate CEOs. And that really was surprising, the way that issue broke down. In the end, we passed a bill out of the House, the Senate passed a bill. We were not able to come to consensus on that issue. But that was surprising, the way that really broke out in terms of support and opposition. The smoking bill was another surprise. Even though I supported the bill, it looked as if we were not going to be able to find consensus, because there was a group of legislators that wanted to do local control. Not that they were opposed to statewide, but they felt the movement towards statewide would end up with so many exemptions to get the requisite votes to pass that it would be a bill that looked like Swiss cheese. They didn't want to go that route, so they wanted to say local control. You had the group that wanted to do statewide and be statewide pure. No exemptions anywhere, but there were not the ability to get 51 votes for a pure statewide ban. And then you had folks that didn't want any regulation of the issue, and it's a very emotional issue, much more emotional. I had several legislators in my office yelling at me for different, either for or against, because it's so emotional, it's cultural. Some people kind of tie these to times in their childhood or things that they do at the local Elks Club or things of that nature. It's kind of a cultural, intense position. And I've said this a couple times, but look at where our culture has already come from. In the 1970s, and I remember this vividly, taking a tour of the state capitol, I remember everybody in the House smoking, legislators and staff. I remember everybody in the Senate smoking. And then I went out into the rotunda to look up at our beautiful dome that we have, and I could barely see it because it was full of smoke. I remember visiting my mother, who worked at a hospital, a Methodist hospital, and I remember walking in and everybody in the waiting room smoked. The nurses smoked, and the doctors smoked, and it was just a big room of smoke here in the cardiology wing of a hospital, okay? But that was culturally acceptable. Now that would be absurd to see that to this today, looking back 3 decades ago. I think we'll look back a few years from now on the legislation we passed this year that banned smoking in 99.9% of public places. Not a perfect bill, but we needed to get 51 votes for passage, and we'll wonder why we ever waited this long to do it. But that was a surprise that we were actually able to get the votes to pass.
I heard that it's not a perfect bill quite a bit. To listen to the debate, could we anticipate some tweaking to it in the years to come?
I think there'll be an all-out effort for this next year's legislative session by health advocates. And, I think the legislature did health advocates a favor, because we could have put them out of business. At least they've got something still to lobby for in going to the next legislative session. I expect there'll be an all-out effort to try to ban smoking at casinos.
You touched on illegal immigration, open meetings. Senator Gronsall, you wanted to see that enforcement mechanism to make sure everyone was adhering to the open meetings laws. And then the student loan overhaul didn't really gain as much traction as there was some discussion over what issues will we be taking up. And again, we just finished, and I'm already looking toward January, but will some of those go back and be brought back up again, put back on the table?
It's certainly possible some of those issues will come back next year, but I'm not going to dwell on that right now. What I tell our folks, this is an election year. I tell our folks to go out, to knock on doors across the state of Iowa, to talk to their constituents and to figure out what it is their constituents want. So this is an election year. I don't think it's time for us to project everything we might do next year. I think it's time for us to listen to the people of Iowa and ask them what they think.